Hello, my name is Chezi Missia, and for my immunology investigation project, I decided to do multiple sclerosis, or MS for short. I'll be focusing on the overall immunology response to MS and the current treatment that is available for this disease. And just a quick reason why I chose MS is because I work in a nursing home and two of my residents suffer from MS, and it's left them with detrimental effects. Unfortunately, they both suffer from paralysis, and ever since I've met them, I've been wanting to learn more about this disease and the immunology of how this can happen. So before I talk about the immunology of how MS can occur, I just wanted to go over the general overview, what it is. So it is a complex autoimmune disease that is caused by the demyelination of the central nervous system, including the brain and spinal cord. And this demyelination is when the myelin sheath that surrounds and protecting the axons of neurons is being degraded. So oligodendrocytes are also attached to these axons, and their role is to help produce myelin. And axons are very important in the body because they allow for electrical signals to go throughout the body very quickly. And in MS, the demyelination occurs when the immune system is inappropriately being attacked by immune cells, and ultimately it leads to the myelin being destroyed. And various problems such as sensory, motor, cognitive problems can arise because of this miscommunication between the neurons. And the symptoms do vary based on the type of MS one has and the location, but most individuals' symptoms will worsen over a period of time. And these symptoms include vision problems, weakness in coordination, muscle weakness, and even paralysis. And I have a picture to kind of show what over time how the myelin is being degraded. So you can see this is like a healthy axon with the myelin surrounding the axon. But over time, like in patients who have MS, the myelin is being degraded and it's just the axon being there. So currently, the specific cause of MS is still unknown to many researchers and scientists. There have been studies that have shown that there are both genetic and environmental factors that play a role in the cause of MS, but the specific cause is still unknown. There is a lot of research, though, on the immunological process for this disease, and I will go into one proposed mechanism of how this process can start through molecular mimicry. So now I will talk about how molecular mimicry starts and kind of the whole process with that. So first you're going to have an antigen-presenting cell that is exposed to a specific unknown antigen, and this could be a virus or environmental factor, like I mentioned before, and the macrophage or any APC will engulf the antigen, express it on the cell surface. It's called MHC2 complex. And when it's expressed, the antigen on MHC2 complex, it will take it and present it to a T helper cell. This T helper cell has a particular type of T cell receptor that it can recognize that antigen. Then that macrophage and T cell will come together, and the T cell receptor will bind to class 2 MHC and the CD4 as a co-receptor. Additionally, there are other linkages, like we mentioned class, but for example, like the co-stimulator CD28 and B7. Once everything links together, then the cytokines like IL-2 will start proliferating. However, in MS and in this case molecular mimicry, the T cell, which has a T cell receptor, will recognize that specific antigen, which could be, like I said, a virus. These specific antigens may look like a particular type of protein that is present within a myelin. So these myelin proteins will look like a similar configuration to that antigen. So T cell receptors are supposed to recognize that specific antigen, but they actually recognize the protein within our body that mimic that antigen, and this is molecular mimicry. So I kind of show just the basic process in this picture over here and the linkages, and then in this figure is kind of like the molecular mimicry and that whole process. So now I will dive deeper into the immunology of MS. So I provided an image that kind of goes through the steps of the immunological response to MS. So at number 1, the picture is kind of showing how the immune response can start, which is kind of what I explained in the previous slide. Then you can see that the T cells and plasma cells will start to enter into circulation through the blood-brain barrier, And usually the blood-brain barrier helps prevent viruses and immune cells from entering. However, in MS patients, these immune cells like macrophages, B and T cells will start to enter because the blood-brain barrier has an increased permeability to these cells. So once the T cells are inside, they can become activated, and in the case of MS, these T cells get activated by coming into contact with oligodendrocytes. So these oligodendrocytes myelinate the axons, which is very important, but since the structure is made out of myelin has specific proteins that resemble some of the antigens that I explained in the previous slide with molecular mimicry. So the T cell recognize the oligodendrocytes as a foreign antigen and interact with the myelin proteins, and they eventually become activated, and this can be depicted in step 2. So now in step 3, once the T cell becomes activated, it starts to kick off an innate immune response, which is very interesting. So these myelin-specific T cells will start release cytokines such as IL-1, IL-6, TNF-alpha, and IFN-gamma, and this causes the blood vessel to vasodilate to allow more cells to enter. So these cytokines will also allow B cells and macrophages to enter into the blood-brain barrier. And in number 4, these B cells will start to make antibodies that mark the myelin sheath proteins, and the macrophages see these markers and use them to engulf the oligodendrocytes, and the neurons left with no myelin protection, ultimately. So as you break down the oligodendrocytes, it's degraded, so scar tissue will start to appear, and this will lead to plaques on the axons or sclera. So this happens on multiple axons, which ultimately leads to multiple sclerosis. So now I just wanted to touch on kind of the reason why people who have MS, they experience their symptoms gradually, or they worsen over time. And there are different types of MS. There's 4 different types, but the most common one is relapsing remitting MS, and basically the process is that T regulatory cells will secrete cytokines like IL-10 or TGF-beta to try to shut down the immune response and try to remyelinate the axons. But this actually doesn't happen for too long, and this is why people who have MS experience a progression of symptoms over time. One of the most common treatments for MS is Ocrevus, and Ocrevus is a type of treatment that is done through an infusion of monoclonal antibodies, and these monoclonal antibodies will bind to a unique protein that are on the surface of a particular type of blood cells, usually the B cells. So when the drug binds to these cells, it causes B cell depletion, and this typically lasts around 6 to 12 months. So, like I said, Ocrevus only depletes certain types of B cells in the body. So in this picture on the left, you can see all these cells in the lineage will be targeted and hopefully eliminated. So the only cells left are these lymphoid stem cells and lived plasma cells. Additionally, as we know, plasma cells do produce antibodies, so they can be auto-reactive against the central nervous system. So those antibodies will be minimized if one would use this type of treatment. Secondly, B cells communicate with other antigen-presenting cells to help stimulate that these cells need to fight against invaders or potentially against the brain and spinal cord in patients with MS. So the signaling either through cytokines or direct activation will be reduced to prevent that signaling back and forth between different immune cells. In conclusion, the cause of MS is still pretty unknown. However, there is much immunology research being done on this disease, and then there are a lot of treatments being studied and tested. I only talked about one, but there is a lot out there that are either being sold or in trial right now. And here are my sources.